Welcome to the episode where we focus on tactics, formations, and players. Some of the nitty gritty stuff that really can make a difference in Ultimate Team. Lots of people know about tactics, but do they really understand tactics in depth? Tactics is something I've specialised in over the last 5 or 6 years of working full time in FIFA, and I think I have a really good understanding of them. Formations, players, they all play their key role in helping you get good performances, perfect results on the pitch. So in this episode, basically, I'm going to go through my tactic. The tactic I'm using right now, we're in the middle of January when I record this, so it's one I've perfected and used a lot over the last 3.5 months since the release of the game. I'll explain the tactic in depth, why I think it's good, what makes it good, how it works in game, and then we'll talk about some different formations. They might not necessarily be the formations that I use most of the time, but just gives you a bit more of an idea how some of them work, what makes them good, what makes them not so good. Just to give you guys more options if you don't like the formation that I use. And then I'll be showing you the players that I use. Obviously, I've got a very good team here. And I'll be talking about why I use them and what makes them good on FIFA 22. So let's get into my actual tactics. Just in case anyone isn't aware of how to do tactics, I do get this sometimes. People hear about tactics that I don't actually know how to do it themselves. It's L2 or LT if you're on Xbox when you're in your squad and you go to the custom tactics section. So you've got 5 potential game plans. Got ultra defensive, defensive, balanced is what you actually start on, and then attacking and ultra attacking. Generally speaking, the balance for me is purely just to get chemistry. So you can see here, my team are starting in the 4-3-3 third variation. I never ever will or have played that on this FIFA. It is just to get chemistry because the way it links the team, I've got 2 wingers, it helps all my players get on full chemistry, which is great. But when it comes to the custom tactic, you start in that, you can see there, and then in game I switch. I will always switch to my defensive tactic to start with. You can see here, I'm a big fan of the 4-4-2. So that's going to be the main formation and tactic we're going to focus on for this video. I think lots of pros, if not majority of pros, will be using 4-4-2 this year. It is a very balanced formation. That is one of the keys and strengths to it. One of the things that just makes it so good. If you actually look at it here, you can just see you've got 2 flat banks of 4. That is perfect on this FIFA for defending, attacking. The 2 strikers are key. On previous FIFAs, the 4-2-3-1 was probably the most dominant and well-rounded formation. But the way it goes on FIFA from year to year is the meta changes, it shifts. You can't just keep repeating the same thing and hoping to get the same results because of the way the game changes. So you do need to adapt to what's working on a current FIFA. 4-2-3-1 and 4-4-2 are probably the 2 most staple formations of FIFA, I would say, in the sense of I'd be very surprised in 10 years' time, unless the game drastically changes, if the 4-2-3-1 and 4-4-2 aren't still good. They're just so well-rounded and balanced. But on this year's FIFA, and probably last year's as well, I think the 4-4-2 has been above the 4-2-3-1 because I really do think the 2 strikers are really key. You might have watched the Tex Masterclass on Gamerzclass this year. I think Tex still runs the 4-2-3-1. He can get away with it because he's just so ridiculously good at tricks and breaking people down. But for me, immortals like me, I still need to use the 4-4-2 because the 2 strikers are really key. The other thing about the 4-4-2 I really like is the left mid and right mid seem to pull out the fullbacks in game. I'm going to also, in a later episode, break down one of my games and you'll see some of that and how the 4-4-2 and my tactic actually works in game. But the way the left mid and right mid pull fullbacks out of position is really key in creating space to then do a driven pass into the strikers and be 2v2 against the centre-backs. And if they make one mistake, you can be on goal. The centre mids, I'll talk a bit more in depth about the players and why I like them when I come to it, but in this formation, you do want all-round box-to-box centre mids, in my opinion. The 4-4-2 does rely a little bit more on its midfield than some other formations because there's just quite a gap between the defence and the attack without that midfield, so they need to bridge that. And when you've only got 2 of them, it's key that they're very good. When you're defending, the 4-4-2 is very solid because it's just got, like I said at the start, 2 flat banks of 4 that can get back and defend. It's good for keeping the ball. In real life, the 4-4-2 is not very good at keeping possession because it normally gets overrun by 3-man midfield. But FIFA doesn't seem to work tactically the same way as real life You can't just run a three-man midfield and boss a 4-4-2 on FIFA, because ultimately on FIFA, a lot of the possession is about how much space your team has and the positions they occupy. The 4-4-2, as you can see there, covers everywhere. Yeah, one of the biggest strengths about the 4-4-2, arguably, is that it doesn't really have a major weakness. It might not be the strongest in any particular area, but it's just so well rounded that it can be used for a lot of play styles and just suits this game really well. So for my actual tactic, like I said, I've got 4 game plans. You can include the balance as 5, but I never actually use that. I've got ultra defensive all the way to ultra attacking. I start in defensive. Having a game plan, way of building up, a way of knowing how you're going to play based on the situation of the game, based on the scoreline is key. I did a masterclass last year for Gamerzclass, and one of the things I mentioned on that was about preparing is key. If you don't prepare, you're probably going to fail. And then when you've prepared, you need to know how you actually do that in game. Having the plan on what you shift and change to is really vital. So you can see here, I've got lots of different tactics. I've not just got one tactic that if it doesn't work, I'm screwed. A lot of people, when I watch them do coaching sessions, watch people play, they only have one tactic. And if they're trying to see out a game and they're getting pressed, they don't really have something to deal with that. If they're trying to get back into the game, they don't really have a way of getting the ball off someone time wasted. So that's why it's key to have lots of different tactical setups. So here we have my first one. I'm pretty much going to always, in a normal tactic that I start the game off in, go balanced on defensive style. Balanced by name, balanced by nature. It is a pretty good way to start a game. Doesn't really reveal too much to your opponent. You can't really go for press after possession loss or constant pressure early, because as soon as you do that, your stamina starts to go down. Especially constant pressure, I would only run that probably last 30 minutes of a game. Drop back, maybe is a little bit too negative on this game, but it probably can work at times as well. For me, I would say the width and depth, I don't think they make a crazy difference this year on the game, especially the depth. I think the depth, honestly, for the most part, the way it tends to work on this game is that when it comes to it, you just find that the team just drop back naturally anyway if you're playing on new gen. It just means the higher depth you put, the higher up the pitch they tend to press. That's the way it works for me. The width, you don't really want to go really low unless you're playing all-out defence and you've got lots of men back anyway. You don't want to go too high either, because then you leave too much space in the middle. So 40, 50, that works for me. For build-up play, I go balanced. I do change it for some other tactics. For chance creation, I always go direct passing. And on previous FIFAs, it just never worked for me. But on this year's game, when you go direct passing, it just almost seems to bug the defence out and makes them drop back to about 6-8 yards out, which makes it a lot easier to create chances if you're patient, because the defence drop back, your strikers push up, so you can just do a driven pass into your striker. I'll probably have an example in one of the games I'll show later where I can point it out properly. But when you do this, it means if you get the pass to your player, he's so close to the goal, one good touch, you probably score. That's a really good way of catching people out of this game, but there's not really anything they can do defensively. In the 4-4-2, I have the width fairly high. It means the left mid and right mid are going to push up. When they push up like this, it's going to help a lot in terms of causing the fullbacks to go out of position. When they go out of position from there, you're going to have a lot more space for the strikers. Players in box, I don't think you want it on too high. You don't want to get counter-attacked. My instructions, balanced, mixed attack, stay forward on the strikers. I go balanced cover centre on the centre mids. I don't want them covering the wings really, because the wingers, left mid, right mid, cover that. I put comeback on defence on my left mid and right mid just so they help the midfield defend. Getting behind, getting to the box. So when I'm on the attack, they're trying to make space out wide. And then stay back on all of my defenders. For the more attacking one, this is purely, honestly, just about when I'm like a goal down, I'm trying to be a bit more aggressive, but I don't want to go all out. This is kind of a mix, a fair balance between my normal tactic and my all-out attack tactic. Press after possession loss, 40 width, so it's the same as before, but higher depth just so I press up a little bit higher. Same on pretty much all of this, I think. The width is the same. I've put one extra players in box and just put an extra man up for free kicks. It is very similar, but the main difference that you'll notice is the depth, but it's the press after possession loss that really changed it. As soon as they lose the ball, I'm using Pep's rule of for 7 seconds, a team's more vulnerable when they've got possession. So we're trying to be more aggressive and win the ball back. For the instructions, pretty much the same across the board. You don't really need to change anything with that yet. The pure fact of changing to press after possession loss means, simply put, you just be more aggressive and you're taking the game to the opponent anyway. For my ultra attacking, this is when it's desperation time. We're chasing a game. We're really struggling to get back into the game. There might be time wasted. It's late on. We need a goal. So we're going constant pressure. Constant pressure simply means you just always all-out press. It is very hard to play against this. I'm sure all of you will have experienced that at some point. High width just to try to stop them. It does open more space in the middle, but I'm trying to stop them just going out wide and time wasted out wide where it's easier. High depth, 100 depth, just to try and get in the face, press as high as we can. Normally I go direct passing, but for this I go forward runs, fast build up, because I'm trying to win the ball and instantly attack. It does make it a bit harder to build up properly, but the idea behind this tactic is it's late on, you're trying to get a goal, you're trying to win the ball high up and go straight forward. For the instructions, we've got getting behind on the strikers, because as soon as I win the ball, I want them making those runs in behind. Got get forward, get into the box on one of the midfielders, balanced attack on one of the others, because I don't want them both so forward that I've got no midfield. Stay forward, cut inside, getting behind, get into box on the left mid, right mid. I want them on stay forward and cut inside because I have overlap and balanced attack on my fullbacks. It is very attacking and you will concede goals potentially here, but I think it's better to try and go all out and make something happen than just sit back and accept defeat. And then I don't always switch to this. It depends how I'm feeling the game's going. If my opponent's spamming a lot of through balls, if they go to the narrow. 5-3-2 is very good against the narrow. Simply put, you've got that extra centre-back to deal with the cam and 2 strikers, the 3 attackers they've got. This is a good formation if you're really struggling to defend or you just struggle to defend in general, late on when someone's pressurising you. I go drop back, really low width and depth, just to get men behind the ball. Be very hard to break down through the middle. In terms of the offense, you're not really focusing too much on offense here, but we still have balanced on that. I've changed from direct passing because I don't want my players pushing up too high. I want them to be close enough that I can keep the ball as well. For instructions, come back on defense on the strikers. They don't come back fully since a patch on, I feel like it was FIFA 19 or 20, probably 19 that this patch happened. No, it was 20 actually, where they changed it because overload ball side was so good that they needed to change come back on defense on strikers, but they still will help a bit. Stay back on the middle centre mid just so he's like an anchor man. Balanced on the 2 outside centre mids. I need them to still attack a little bit so I can keep the ball. And then stay back on all of the defenders. Those are the tactics. Those are what worked for me this year so far. I think it's got a lot of good variety when it comes to actually dealing with different game situations. Okay, so formations. There's lots of different options on the game. I do think there are just certain ones that work better. For me, 4-4-2 is still king on FIFA for all the reasons I said at the start of this episode. But it isn't the only way to play. It's not the only tactic pros will use at a high level. I think 4-2-3-1 is still going to be popular. Like I said earlier on, it's so well-rounded. It's good at keeping the ball. It is a more possession-orientated formation because when it comes to the 4-2-3-1, the midfield's a bit closer. Also, the 2 centre defensive mids that you have in that formation just make it a bit more viable defensively, a bit stronger. Also, you can have the cam on comeback on defence who will do a lot more than the striker might in the 4-4-2. In the 4-4-2, you do have the option of going to the defensive mid version. I much preferred that on FIFA 21. But this year, I feel like the attack just lacks a little bit in that formation in that one. But the 4-2-3-1, very good option. The narrow or the 4-3-1-2, both very similar. The difference between this is one has a CDM, one has a centre mid. The 4-3-1-2 maybe is a little bit better going forward because of the centre mid in the 3-man midfield, where it was a 4-man midfield, but there's like 3 centre mid midfield. The narrow has the defensive mid who can sit back a bit more. These are more out and out attack formations for the most part. There has been some pros who've had quite a lot of success this year on the game with this. I think what they do is they use the direct passing tactic and then they get the men forward, and when they've got all these men forward and they overwhelm opponents with all these men in the middle, it is a very good formation to attack with. It is a bit weak in some ways. If you don't have the fullbacks on overlap or balance, you don't really get a lot of width in this formation. I've seen some pros literally using fullbacks on staying back still. So you are very much putting all your eggs in one basket of attacking through the middle, which it can work. But if someone knows how to counter it with the 5-back or is just very good at defending, you might struggle. But I do think it's one of the more fun formations to use. I guess that's more attacking, lots of options in the middle. The 4-2-2 is a very good option. The thing about the 4-2-2 is that it is really nice in terms of it's a hybrid between the 4-2-3-1 and 4-4-2, but it kind of doesn't really excel enough in either way for me to go to that instead of the other two. I do think it's got some good options. I think at the start of this year's game, it was better than it is now when the finesses were broken almost, when they were just so good, because the Lam and Ram were perfectly set up to do finesses. You had two strikers which helped attack. The 4-2-3-1 is really good for the finesses, but it doesn't have the two strikers, whereas this one does. It's got the defensive stability of the two CDMs. It's a good, well-rounded formation. If you want a mix of the 4-2-3-1 and 4-4-2, this is probably one of the best ones to go for. The other options you've got really a 5-back. You can make this more attacking. You can't play 5-back as a normal tactic with the way I've set up as my ultra defensive tactic. You can make it more attacking by making the wing backs go to balanced or even join the attack and overlap. You could have two of the centre mids on get forward. It is still going to be limited in some ways. It was really good on FIFA 21, but I don't think it's quite as strong this year. But it is good at dealing with through balls because it has the extra centre back, so your centre backs aren't getting pulled out as bad, which I do think can be quite useful. The 3-5-2 is probably the last one I would say. I think it is up there for the best attacking formation in the game. It is just a bit lapse defensively because if you get set up shape where you can have it where the opponent keeps the ball for a while, it is going to be pretty good because the left mid and right mid, you'll have them on comeback on defence and they'll drop back. But if your opponent counters quickly, which most people at high level do on this game because of how good through balls are, the left mid and right mid are going to be in the attack. They're not going to get in shape in time and you're going to be exposed. Whereas going forward, it is really good because you have 3 attackers in the middle with the cam and the 2 strikers. You've got 2 CDMs who can help defensively but also retain the ball. You could even have one on balance attack so he gets forward a bit more. Then you've got the left mid and right mid doing what they do in the 4-4-2 where they help pull men out and then you've got 3 men in the middle rather than the 2 in the 4-4-2. So it's very hard to defend against, but it's also hard to defend. It's a bit too risky for me to play as a main tactic, but I have had fun with it before. So those are our formations. Those are what work for me. Let's get into some of the players and what I like in a player on FIFA 22. So we've just gone over my tactics and formation. I talked to you about why I use my tactics, why I think the 4-4-2 is so good, what makes it so strong on FIFA 22. But I also gave you some different options to use for formations, explained some of the strengths and weaknesses, and I also talked about how key having a game plan is. That's that video wrapped up. Next video, we're going to get into players and how they fit into my tactics formation and what you should look for on FIFA 22 when it comes to players.